It started as a simple visit to my friend's house, but the way his mother looked at me that night, like she was carrying a secret, changed everything. And when she whispered, "Don't tell him," I've imagined this before, I realized some moments can't be forgotten. I never thought much about the small, ordinary visits to my friend's house. To me, it was just another familiar place, a second living room, a kitchen I could walk into without knocking. But that night, something about it felt different. Maybe it was the way the house was lit, warm embers spilling from lamps instead of the usual harsh ceiling light. Or maybe it was the faint smell of coffee drifting through the hall, wrapping itself around me like a quiet welcome. When I stepped inside, my friend's mom was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled just past her elbows, hair falling in loose strands around her face. She wasn't dressed up, not at all, just a soft sweater and jeans, but there was an effortless kind of elegance about her. She had that look of someone who didn't need to try. And though I'd known her for years, I caught myself noticing things I hadn't before. The grace in the way she moved. The calm steadiness of her presence. "You look tired," she said, glancing at me with a smile that was gentle but observant, like she could read more than I was saying. I laughed it off, muttering something about long days at work, but she didn't brush it aside the way most people would. Instead, she reached for the kettle and asked, "Tea? Or coffee?" Her voice carried a softness that lingered in the air, making it harder to look away. I nodded, and before I knew it, she was placing a cup in my hands. For just a second, her fingers brushed against mine. It was the smallest touch, so ordinary it should have meant nothing. But the warmth of her skin stayed with me, like an imprint I couldn't shake. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, while the kettle hissed behind her. The house felt unusually quiet. My friend was upstairs, probably scrolling on his phone, leaving us in this bubble of silence and soft conversation. She asked about school, about how I was holding up. It wasn't the kind of polite curiosity most adults gave. Hers felt different, like she really wanted to know. I found myself telling her more than I expected, about the weight of deadlines, the pressure I didn't talk about with anyone else. She listened without interrupting, her chin resting on one hand, her eyes steady on me. And for the first time, I realized how rare that was, to be seen that clearly, without judgment, without distraction. When my friend finally came downstairs, the spell broke. He laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and pulled me toward the living room. But as I set the cup down, my gaze flickered back to her. She caught it for the briefest moment, a quiet glance, almost nothing. Later that evening, the house grew quieter. My friend left the kitchen to grab something upstairs, calling out that he'd be just a minute. His footsteps faded, and suddenly it was just me and her again, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. She was wiping down the counter, moving slowly, almost absent-mindedly, as though her thoughts were somewhere else. I sat at the table, unsure if I should pull out my phone or say something. But then she turned, catching me mid-thought, and smiled in that calm, knowing way she had. "You're quieter than usual," she said softly, her tone more observation than question. I shrugged, offering a small smile. "Maybe I'm just enjoying the peace. It's rare these days." She gave a short laugh, one that reached her eyes. "It doesn't stay peaceful for long. Life has a way of rushing in." She leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me with a look that was steady, not intense, but attentive. Like she wanted to understand something about me. We talked, not about anything remarkable, but about little things. She asked about my classes, my work. I asked about her garden, the books stacked on the counter. It was casual, but the rhythm of it felt easy, unhurried. And then there were the pauses. The moments in between where either of us spoke, but the silence didn't feel empty. Instead, it carried a weight, almost a pull, as if something unspoken lingered just beneath the surface. At one point, she laughed at something I said, a quiet, genuine laugh that softened her whole face. But when it faded, her eyes stayed on me just a little too long. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me to feel it. Her hand rested on the table near mine, fingers brushing lightly against the wood. I placed my own hand nearby, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. My pulse quickened, though nothing had actually happened. It was strange. I'd sat across from countless people before, but with her, the air felt different. Thicker somehow. Every small gesture seemed amplified. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her sweater slipped slightly at the shoulder when she reached for her glass. I found myself memorizing details without meaning to: the faint scent of her perfume, the delicate lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, the calm steadiness in her voice that carried a quiet strength. Just as the moment seemed to stretch longer than it should, the sound of footsteps returned. My friend's voice carried down the hall, breaking whatever silence had held us. She drew back slightly, her hand shifting away from mine, as though the spell had been interrupted. But before she turned, her gaze lingered on me one last time, brief, restrained, but unmistakable. Later that night, as I was getting ready to leave, I found myself moving slower than usual. My friend had already disappeared upstairs again, his door shutting with the muffled beat of music behind it. The house was dim, shadows stretching long across the floor. And there she was, standing near the front door as if she had been waiting for me. "Heading out?" she asked softly, her voice low enough that it felt meant only for me. I nodded, slipping my shoes on. "Yeah. Got an early morning tomorrow." She walked me toward the door, her steps unhurried. There was no reason for the moment to feel unusual, yet it did. The air between us carried a kind of hesitation, like words hung in her throat, waiting for the right space to fall. As I reached for the doorknob, she surprised me. "You know," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "when I was your age, I thought I had life figured out. I thought I knew where I was going." She paused, her gaze drifting past me for a second before returning, softer now. "But looking back, I realize how uncertain I really was." I turned to face her fully, sensing something deeper in her tone. "I think everyone feels that way," I said gently. "I feel it too." She studied me for a moment, her eyes searching mine as if weighing whether to go on. Then she sighed, a fragile sound. "It's strange, isn't it? Watching years slip by. The house feels too quiet now. My son's grown, the days run together, and sometimes it feels like I'm invisible." Her words sank into me. I'd never heard her speak like that, not as someone's mother, not as the warm, steady presence I'd always known, but as a woman who was, in her own way, lonely. Without thinking, I said, "You're not invisible." The words were simple, but the effect wasn't. She blinked, her lips parting as though she hadn't expected to hear it. For a moment, silence filled the space between us. Then, almost unconsciously, she reached out and placed her hand on my forearm. It was a small gesture, a touch light enough to pull away at any second, but she didn't. Her fingers lingered, warm against my skin, and I felt the quiet tremor in them. The moment stretched. My heart thudded in my chest, not from boldness but from the unspoken weight of it all, the awareness that this was no longer ordinary. She drew back quickly, almost too quickly, her composure returning like a curtain pulled closed. "Good night," she whispered, offering a faint smile, though her eyes carried something else. Something raw. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my face. But as I walked away, the memory of her touch stayed with me, light, trembling, and far more meaningful than I could admit. The days that followed weren't the same. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking a simple moment at the door, reading into something that wasn't really there. But no matter how much I tried to push it aside, I couldn't shake the feeling of her hand on my arm, the way her eyes had softened just before she pulled away. Every time I thought about visiting my friend, a knot tightened in my chest. I knew I'd see her again, and I knew the air between us wouldn't be the same. The next weekend, I found myself back at their house, sitting in the living room with my friend. The TV was on, but I wasn't paying attention. I could feel her presence in the background, moving between rooms, her footsteps light, her voice carrying faintly from the kitchen. And every time she passed by, I caught the subtle shift in her expression, that quiet glance that lingered a second too long. I told myself to stop noticing. I told myself this wasn't right. She was my friend's mom. She had a life built long before I ever stepped into it. And yet, the more I tried to reason with myself, the more the truth pressed down on me. Something had changed, and it wasn't going back. Later that night, she offered to drive me home. It was late, and my friend was too tired to bother, so I agreed. We didn't say much at first. The hum of the car filled the silence, headlights cutting through the empty streets. I stole glances at her when I thought she wasn't looking, the calm way she held the wheel, the faint reflection of passing streetlights tracing her features. She looked composed, as always, but there was a tightness around her mouth, like she was holding something back. At one point, as she shifted gears, her sleeve brushed against my arm. It was nothing more than fabric against fabric, yet my pulse stumbled. I could feel the warmth of her so close, and for a moment I imagined what it would be like if she simply let her hand rest there. But the thought came with its own weight. The voice in my head wouldn't quiet. This isn't supposed to happen. What would he think? What would this mean? She must have felt something too, because when we reached a red light, her fingers lingered on the gear's shift longer than they needed to. The space between us seemed impossibly small. My breath caught, and for an instant I thought she might say something. But the light turned green, and just like that, the moment passed. Neither of us spoke for the rest of the drive. But when she pulled up outside my place and the engine quieted, the silence felt heavier than words. When the car rolled to a stop outside my apartment, neither of us moved. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, and the quiet of the street pressed in, heavy and expectant. I should have unbuckled my seatbelt, thanked her, and stepped out. But something in me hesitated, the same hesitation I saw in her hands as they rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. I turned my head, and she was already looking at me. Not in the casual way people glance, but with a stillness that made the air between us tighten. Her lips parted, then closed again, as if she was fighting against her own words. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't tell him." She paused, her eyes searching mine, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. "Don't tell him, but I've imagined this before." The world seemed to stop. The hum of the city faded, the cool night air outside forgotten. All I could hear was the echo of her confession, quiet yet undeniable, cutting straight through me. My chest tightened. 100 thoughts crashed into each other: shock, disbelief, the heavy realization that what I'd been feeling wasn't just in my head. She felt it too. "I shouldn't have said that," she murmured quickly, her hand lifting to brush her hair back, though it trembled as she did. She let out a shaky laugh, a sound laced with nerves rather than humor. I don't know what's wrong with me tonight. But I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was the truth, clawing its way to the surface after being locked away for too long. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "You don't have to apologize." The words came out rougher than I intended, but I meant them. She shook her head, her gaze dropping to her hands in her lap. "You don't understand. I've spent so long being careful, keeping things steady. And yet here I am, sitting in this car with you, saying things I never thought I'd let myself say." Her honesty left me breathless. For years she had been the picture of control, always composed, always grounded. And now, seeing her like this, vulnerable, uncertain, felt like being trusted with something fragile. Without thinking, I reached across the small space and laid my hand gently over hers. She stiffened for a moment, then slowly, her fingers loosened, curling lightly into my palm. She exhaled, a sound that was almost a sigh of relief. Her eyes lifted to mine again, and though she didn't smile, there was something raw, unguarded, shimmering there. Her words hung in the air, trembling between us. I still felt the warmth of her hand beneath mine, the way her fingers had tensed, then softened as though giving in to something she could no longer resist. Neither of us moved quickly. There was no rush, no need for it. The silence itself felt like a kind of confession, heavier than anything we could say. She drew in a slow breath, her shoulders rising before falling again, as if she had finally let go of some invisible weight. "I don't know what I'm doing," she whispered, her eyes flickering toward the windshield, away from me. "You don't have to," I murmured, squeezing her hand gently. "We don't have to figure it out right now." Her gaze returned to me, and for the first time that evening, her eyes looked softer, not afraid, but searching. She shifted slightly in her seat, turning toward me more fully, and the movement brought her close enough that I could see the faint trace of tiredness at the corners of her eyes, the curve of her lips as they parted in hesitation. Then, slowly, she leaned in, not all the way, not reckless, but just enough that her forehead came to rest against my shoulder. The contact was featherlight at first, testing, as though she might pull back at any second. But when I didn't move, she stayed. Her cheek brushed against my chest, and I felt the faintest tremor in her breath, the rhythm of her heartbeat pressing through the quiet. My arm moved almost instinctively, slipping around her shoulders, holding her in a way that wasn't bold, but steady, a quiet reassurance that she was safe here. She closed her eyes, her body relaxing against mine by degrees. "It's been so long since I've let anyone this close," she admitted softly, her words muffled against me. "I didn't realize how much I missed it." I swallowed, my throat tight, my own voice low. "Me too." We stayed like that, either speaking for a while, the night outside wrapping us in its stillness. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, warm and floral, blending with the clean scent of her sweater. Every detail imprinted itself on me, the weight of her against my side, the gentle way her fingers rested now, tangled lightly with mine, the quiet steadiness that began to replace the trembling in her breath. It wasn't passion that filled the car that night. It was something quieter, more profound. A crossing of an invisible line, not with recklessness, but with tenderness. When she finally lifted her head, she didn't look away in embarrassment. Her eyes met mine, calm yet shimmering with unspoken things. And though either of us leaned further, though no kiss followed, the closeness itself was enough. When she finally pulled back, the car felt different, quieter somehow, even though it had already been silent for so long. I could still feel the imprint of her against me, the warmth where her cheek had rested, the faint press of her hand in mine. She let out a breath, steady this time, and looked at me with eyes that seemed both afraid and at peace. "We can't rush this," she said softly. Not a warning, but a truth spoken aloud. Her fingers slipped slowly from mine, though the space she left behind still burned with their warmth. I nodded. "I know." And I did. Whatever this was, whatever it could become, it wasn't something to take lightly. Not with her. Not with us. She studied me for a moment longer, her expression unreadable at first, then softening into the kind of smile that doesn't reach the lips, only the eyes. A smile that says thank you for understanding. The night air was cool as I finally opened the car door, the quiet street stretching out before me. But I lingered, leaning down into the doorway, reluctant to let the moment end too abruptly. She was still watching me, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, her posture composed again, but not closed off. Something had changed. "Take care of yourself," she said gently, the words carrying more weight than casual concern. I smiled faintly. "I will. And you too." For a second, either of us moved. It felt like both of us were memorizing the moment, quietly tucking it away somewhere safe. Then I stepped back, letting the door click shut. She started the engine, headlights flaring softly against the dark. I stood on the curb and watched as her car pulled away, the taillights glowing red before they disappeared around the corner. The night felt colder once she was gone, and yet inside me, something was warm, not fiery or reckless, but steady. Walking up to my door, I realized what made it different. Until that night, I had thought of her as someone untouchable, distant, steady, existing in a world parallel to mine. But she wasn't untouchable. She was human. Vulnerable. And for reasons I didn't fully understand, she had let me see that side of her. We hadn't crossed every line, hadn't said everything we could have said. And maybe that was why it mattered so much. It wasn't about stealing a moment of passion, it was about recognizing something real, something fragile, and holding it carefully. Inside my apartment, the silence felt strange without her voice, without her nearness. My hand still remembered the feel of hers, my shoulder the weight of her resting against me. And as I lay down that night, one thought kept circling in my mind: some moments don't need to be loud or obvious to change you. Sometimes it's the quietest ones, a glance, a touch, a whispered truth, that linger the longest.